It happened when I was a teenager. After school, we always walked home with our friends in the same direction, but near the old house our paths diverged. My house was on the right side. The street I had to walk down was almost extinct. We all called it that because hardly anyone lived there. I was always afraid to walk down it. By almost I meant that there was one person still living on that street that I had never seen or heard of. All 10 houses on the street were empty, but there was someone living in one house. This was evidenced by the lights burning in the night and the radio playing constantly. But the thing that struck me the most was the toys. All kinds of toys, mostly plush, stood on the windowsill and stared out the window with their inanimate gaze, adding fear to the empty street. Every time I walked past the old house, I marveled at the fact that there were more and more toys. Every week one toy appeared. At first I thought there was some spoiled child living in the house who had more toys than I had clothes. My musings were dispelled when I began to realize that the child was not frolicking outside. After all children run around the yard. However, in addition to not seeing the child, I also didn't know who lived in the house, as no one had ever shown themselves to me from inside. This happened during the summer. That day we went with some friends to the woods where someone had recently made a bungee cord. Stretching out on the dense ground, we flew off a cliff around a tree and landed again on the very spot from which we had jumped. There were 5 of us: Michael, Anthony, Jake, Noah, and me. But there was one person missing to make up the whole team: Logan. He was supposed to come to my house so we could bungee jump together. However, after I went out into the yard, Logan was not at my house. Thinking that he was already bungee jumping with his friends, I went to the woods, but as it turned out, he wasn't there either. We all thought Logan had some urgent business that was keeping us from having fun, but it had been exactly an hour since we had bungee jumped and Logan hadn't even called us to let us know why he wasn't home. At first we thought he had left us, that he just wasn't interested in bungee jumping. But then we agreed that something had happened to him. Pasha called Logan's house and his mom answered the phone. "Hello, is Logan home?"
Logan? Isn't he with you? He left about 2 hours ago.
That's weird, he never showed up.
Maybe he's out somewhere.
We had no choice, so we had to look for him all over the village. We walked all the streets but never found him, but night caught up with us and we had to go home. As I was walking down the dead street, I noticed the only house in the village, and in the moonlight I noticed a new plush toy on the windowsill. It was a gray rabbit with long ears. It was looking at me through the window, and I felt an incomprehensible terror when I looked into its eyes. They were glassy, almost like real ones, and it was as if they were crying out for help. It became completely frightening when the radio started playing, interrupted by a slight noise. The wind blew, and the broken gate of the house creaked, forcing me to leave the place as soon as possible. The next day, Noah was not with us. According to his father, he too had left the house about an hour ago, saying he was going out with his friends. We were completely bewildered. 2 of us were already missing, and at this point everyone was afraid for themselves. There was a rumor in the street that there was a maniac in the village, much to the surprise of its small population. Walking home in the evening, I noticed that we had a new toy. It was a blue elephant with black eyes. He stared at me intently, making me nervous, and I pondered the mysterious appearances of more and more toys. The next week, Michael and Jake disappeared. Anthony and I were the only ones left, but we were too scared to go outside and preferred to stay home. The police searched the entire village, the woods, the ponds, all in vain. None of the missing people were ever found, which frightened the villagers even more. We were bored at home, so we decided to take a walk with Anthony at our own risk, trying to stick together, not to go far away from the village and certainly not to go bungee jumping, which was quite far away from people. Dusk was thickening, night was falling, and before we said goodbye at the old house, I called Anthony over to my place for tomorrow, to play on the computer. Heading home alone, I was horrified, as before, by the grey Gothic style of the abandoned street. The fog lightly covered the already impenetrable darkness, only adding to its eeriness. When I heard the radio, I froze. Toys, buttons, thread, though the children were already at a loss. The radio hissed and turned off, and I realized I was passing by this strange house. Looking out the window, I saw that the toys on the windowsill were getting bigger and bigger. There was a bat with yellow crystal eyes and a bear cub that had. Thoughts raced through my head at breakneck speed. I froze in place and held my breath as if stunned as I continued to stare out the window. The bear cub's right eye was blue and the left was red. Everything would have been fine if it weren't for the fact that a week ago, when we tried out the bungee cord for the first time, Michael had accidentally bumped his eye on a branch. No big deal, except his eye was a little red from blood. And that's when I realized it all at once. My body was covered with goosebumps, my legs felt stiff, and I tried to leave the place as quickly as possible, trying not to go crazy. But no sooner had I left the house than a sharp pain shot up my back. My eyes blurred and my legs stopped obeying me. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was my grandmother, but to all the horror, unusual. Her eyes were inanimate, black in color, and she was like she was made of thread. My grandmother was stabbing my body with a large needle. I tried to scream with pain and fear, but my mouth was sewn shut, the threads preventing me from opening it. Tears rolled down my cheeks and I couldn't believe that this terrible thing was happening to me. Blood was oozing out of my stitched-up skin, and I felt like I had lost my mind watching my grandmother sewing me up with thread. It was like a terrible torture for me, but I didn't understand at all what was being done to me. Grandma finished stitching up my skin and stepped away from me. I tried to get up, but nothing worked, and at one point I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the whole house was littered with toys, thread, needles, and other things. After a while the old woman came to me, put candles on, she had been working by moonlight before, and began to paint herself with various satanic symbols. Then she put a soft Minnie Mouse toy in front of me and started the soul transmigration ritual. I realized this a little later. After circling my body with red lipstick, the crazy woman stood in front of me and started saying something in a language I didn't understand. This went on for about an hour until my body was drained of blood and I almost died. At this point she walked over to me, took a needle, a button, a thread and put it to my eye. A sharp pain pierced my eye and I immediately lost consciousness. I woke up sitting on the windowsill looking like Minnie Mouse. I couldn't move, and I couldn't seem to speak. I could only stare out the window. Several hours passed like that. It was noon and I saw Anthony walking past the toy house where I was. At that moment I felt a prick of guilt, for I was the one who had called him to me. I tried to yell at him or at least signal him to leave, but nothing worked. I could only watch his movements. The radio started playing. Anthony stopped and looked out the window as if he saw something suspicious, but I just watched as the bear gave him a shot and he fell asleep instantly, and then she carried him into the house to the monotonous sounds of the beeping radio. Perhaps now I will be sold to some little children and they will play and throw and just use me as a doll and I will remain a soft toy, forever.